Sabrina 90's show, Cat Showdown. Sabrina calls Hilda and hopes she'll be home. She should just use telepathy. She wouldn't be worried because she could use telepathy anyway. This would only make sense if she's out of magic. She tells Hilda she left her homework at home. Speaking of that, she's definitely out of magic. My problem is, I don't feel like I'm supposed to think that because the show hasn't told me that witches can run out of magic yet, and it's not going to assume everyone knows about that. And it's not going to assume everyone knows that about Sabrina comics because it's mostly aimed at people who didn't read the comics. You can tell because the ants aren't dressed like witches because they had no faith in the average person to still like the show, even though they liked the comics. So it's really just the writer disrespectfully making Sabrina somehow too dumb to do this herself, since she was panicked when calling home, which implies that she thought she needed her. Hilda casts and then sneezes, and somehow that causes the book to get sent to a desert, even though she wouldn't have imagined that. This would only make sense if she caught a man-made airborne computer virus in the witch realm that messes up spells. But since that's not explained, and she's healthy in the next scene, it's just the writer kicking Sabrina in the gut to be spiteful. To be fair, she is risking someone in the hallway seeing the book warp to her, which would require her to make him doubt his own sanity, so that'd be a dick move. But it's safe to say someone as nice as her was counting on nobody seeing the book appear. She was next to a wall, so she could have just faced it to block the book. This was an especially terrible start, but at least Hilda did try to help her with no strings attached. If this was the 2000s comic, she'd refuse because you can't use magic for everything. And to teach you that, you're not even allowed to use it for a few things. Somehow Sabrina doesn't get why she's expected to read a book called 1984 when that's not what 1984 ended up like. Someone tells Harvey and Sabrina they could pay money to go to a fun place, but it's too much for Harvey, and Sabrina hates that she couldn't ask her aunts for the money because they want to teach her the value of $1. It's convenient for the sake of inflation that she doesn't zap up money, like other versions of Sabrina. Salem maxed out his credit card, and Zelda has to deal with the mailman who's jealous of some other potential rival for his affection. So Hilda gives her a book of potions to show her a revulsion perfume. It does save on magic to use a perfume instead of just pointing, which could also solve the problem. Sabrina looks at the newspaper to find a way to make money, and Salem tells her to enter a cat show. He says he's not her pet, and tells her not to write down her own last name on Salem, even though the judges would question that because pets have the same last names as their owners. This is the first time the series gives him his own last name, Saberhagen, which sounds cool, but it's trying too hard. So it would have been a good joke if he was lying. Why does she have to ask him what breed he is? She's known him for a while. I knew what breed each of my dogs was. Harvey sounds confused when saying, Saberhagen, right? Exactly. Salem talks in the cage before the cat show in a room full of people. To be fair, the show does try to have crowd murmuring noises to imply that he'd be drowned out, but she's still near people, who would know what direction the voice is coming from. Someone calls Salem pretty. Wouldn't she notice that the sound of throat clearing from a man came from Salem? Harvey got Sabrina a good number. How do you determine a good number? How does the judge know Salem's expression? Cats are expressionless. He says he's one of America's top short hairs. The cat owners have to walk in a circle carrying their cats, and Sabrina thankfully lampshades that this is the cheesiest thing she ever did. Sabrina lets Harvey leave since he's relatably bored. She tells the judge to ask Salem a simple multiplication question. He answers right. To be fair, he is extremely restricted in what he gets to do as a cat, and he'd have self-esteem issues because of his situation, so that would motivate him to memorize the times tables for the sake of an ego boost. Sometimes people have hidden depths. The judge says amazing, but they do judge only based on appearance. There's a boring montage that just shows cats while nice music plays. And already we see Salem get first prize. First off, it's so lazy of the writer to not show any interesting events in the cat show. This is the laziest version of this plot I've ever seen. Even the Sonic X comic did a better job. Why even have a plot like this if you'll do nothing with it? Second, Salem won first prize on the first try, even though the cats are judged strictly on appearance, and Sabrina doesn't have any experience in making her cat look as nice as possible. So how did she win? I guess it was just because he was good at math, and the appeal of a gloomy black cat combined with the name Salem. Because it's a full moon, she can get her magic perfume. But the full moon's nothing but an illusion caused by sunlight hitting the entirety of a side of the moon that's facing the Earth. Why does that matter? She goes to a full moon salon. Oh, so it makes sense. It's easy to assume that the reason it's only open on a full moon is that the saleswoman only wants this as an occasional job and usually does something else for money. Even real businesses have inconvenient hours. The ants get approached by a very pushy saleswoman. She tells Zelda that someone as pretty as her needs a lot of revulsion perfume. Hilda gets warned not to use a sample, somehow does so anyways like she wouldn't be caught on camera. Not to mention she's in a witch store, and gets shrunken because of the anti-sample spell. Somehow the saleswoman's surprised by the spell working. Why did she wait until today to cast it? Seriously, is this the first time Hilda ever went to a store selling these things? That's weird considering how old she is. She was so casual about calling this. She complains about them picking on the little guy. That could be funny if you're in the right mood. The judge gets a call that threatens him with photos, and he promises the person his cat would be named best of the show. Well, it was probably the woman who bragged about all the ribbons she got and had whisker extensions because the narrative wanted you to hate her right away and didn't call attention to any of the other people. He would have had to deal with it if they didn't pick a celebrity to be the judge. Salem warns Sabrina, and Sabrina uses magic to summon the photo. The judge heads for Sabrina, and Salem warns her with a loud, obviously fake meow that he doesn't question. Sabrina somehow decides to disguise herself as a cat of all things, the worst possible thing to turn herself into. So of course she gets put into the cage by the man who I guess convinced himself he imagined hearing that fake meow. She says if she can't point, she can't change herself back. She has paws. She could point with that. She could have just turned herself invisible, since she did that to Joel in an earlier episode. The ants free her, and one of them somehow only turns her head back to normal at first. Zelda says a reverse angle spell will tell them who's the blackmailer. He's wearing a loose robe obscured by shadow with a cloth covering him because he was using an old-fashioned camera. All Sabrina can see is the hand, so Zelda finds out that the blackmailer's missing half an index finger. Why didn't that person wear a prosthetic? Sabrina decides to try to find things out by being gracious to the cat owners and offering handshakes, but two of them are antisocial freaks who refuse. Even I never did that. Hilda zaps up mini quiches to help. It turns out all of those people have half an index finger missing, each for a different reason, realistically. Well, crazy coincidences happen in real life too, even if it always being the same finger is slightly less believable. Sabrina tells the judge she needs to talk to him and pushes him, but somehow he goes into the room anyway. She says she saw the photo so she knows what's happened to him. He's only being blackmailed over being bald. I expected something completely different. He explains that they've done studies and people don't trust bald people as much. The judge finds out about the whisker extensions, which he should have figured out earlier, because he already judged every cat. And when Salem calls it out, we do see someone looking around in confusion. But the judge defends the cat. He says that's desperate and vain, but he defends the cat anyway. He says it's like looking into a mirror and reveals that he's bald. The whisker faker's the blackmailer. The reason this is disappointing is that I expected to learn something new when finding out who the blackmailer was. Sabrina says trust should be about honesty and accurate reporting. Hilda warns that she's talking about TV news. The second jab at how journalism was degraded. This aged pretty well, so I like this joke. When the judge says Salem, he says something and somehow no one reacts. I just have to assume everyone who saw that he was the one talking convinced himself he was hallucinating it. And anyone who heard his voice assumed it wasn't from him. It turns out the judge changed his mind and actually wants to make Sabrina in her cat form the winner. But nobody owns the cat, because it was something that Sabrina made up, so she was put in an extra cage. And the judge never questioned that it was a cat he never saw before, for some reason. This is why I was being nice and assuming that she disguised herself as a cat that was already there. Hilda holds the sobbing Salem to comfort him. To be fair, he did try to take over the world in the past, so it's understandable that he wouldn't get a win. Harvey loves holding her as a cat, and wishes he could adopt her because she's the most gentle, loving cat ever. Hilda uses magic on the judge's mirror so that he feels good about his looks. That was unusually nice for her to do for a stranger, but nobody would be able to stand her if she never did anything nice. Sabrina gives Salem the blue ribbon saying that he's the best cat, and uses her finger on his chin. The mailman gets invited into Zelda's house and says lamely that she's not a mere occupant to him. Then he says a sweet romantic speech to her that she's the bright spot on his route. She uses the magic perfume which gives her buck teeth. I thought it'd work by making people repulsed without making the user ugly. I guess the point of the perfume is that it brainwashes people into thinking the user bit always looked this way so that they don't come to the conclusion that the user put on fake teeth. Why would someone subject herself to this? If you cast a spell to make someone not into you, you wouldn't have to deal with this. Surely there could be a magic perfume that does the revulsion spell without the buck teeth part. But it turns out it's true love because the mailman just asks her if she's tired without being put off. This story completely skipped over the potentially interesting part of the cat show Salem got entered into, making it the worst one I've ever seen, where the only interesting part is that the judge got blackmailed. But his baldness caused them to relate to the cat with whisker extensions and reveal his baldness so that he could vote truthfully. And Sabrina gives out the moral of the story that honesty is good. I suppose they're making two different species about it makes it the moral. I'm glad someone other than Sabrina was the one who needed to learn the lesson. It still had her be impossibly stupid multiple times in the episode, but never at a point that mattered to the plot. It was only slightly engaging as a story. The plot itself was boring. It was a surprisingly good twist that magic couldn't solve who the blackmailer was. It's like it's telling you that you can't force the truth to come out of a liar, because he has to make himself feel bad about it and be honest.